It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays are for me to talk about monster movies. Now, somehow I managed to go a whole 45 weeks of Monster Mondays before talking about the friend of all children, our friend to all children, and the guardian of the universe, Gamera. Gamera was developed by Yanajiro Saito for Daiei Films, and it was entirely intended to compete with Godzilla from Toho. While Godzilla is a hyper-stylized Tyrannosaurus Rex, Gamera is also inspired by a prehistoric creature. Gamera is not only inspired by an ancient tortoise, but is also inspired by a Chinese constellation, the Black Tortoise. His name is also much more closely related to what he looks like. Gojira, which is Godzilla's actual Japanese name, is kind of a combo of whale and gorilla. Gamera comes very close to the Japanese word for turtle. For this week, I'm going to watch Gamera the Giant Monster, his 1965 debut film. And much like the original Godzilla film, this is a black and white movie. Additionally, he's also seen as a menace, though there is a bit of a twist here on that idea. Of course, we'll see later in sequels that he is actually an extremely child-friendly creature. I mean, Gamera's first film was hitting right about the same time that Godzilla's exploits were featuring more of his monster pals like Rodan, Mothra, etc., and showing him in a much more family-friendly light, as opposed to the terrible abomination of man's near dalliance with the extreme might of nuclear power. This original film does use nuclear power to awaken Gamera, but, that's kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to these monster movies. Now, I think we have two big elephants in the room to talk about when it comes to Gamera in general. First, Gamera is a giant turtle, but not only that, he is a bipedal turtle. So he's standing on his hind legs, which outside of something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a little odd to see. It's odd because it does at times create strange things with his arms. However, and this needs to be celebrated big time, the best thing about Gamera is that he flies. Sure, flying anything isn't too hard to sell with someone in a movie, but with Gamera, it can be something truly spectacular. Gamera has the ability to pull in his head, his legs, and his arms, because no duh, he's a fucking turtle. He then has these jet-powered, like vents, I guess, where his limbs are, and whoa boy, that's when the magic begins. He uses it to spin like a top, I guess, but like a super big and super fast top. He uses it as a weapon, he uses it as a mode of transportation, and he just spins through the air like a giant fucking turtle. I think Roger Ebert best summed it up as far as the science of all of this. In his very positive and frankly jubilant review of 1995 series reboot for the Heisei period, Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, he wrote, and I quote, "Considering that Gamera never needs to refuel, we must assume he is organic and not mechanical. Therefore, the jet blasts come not from burning petrol, but from the byproducts of organic material. This is not a matter of shame for the Japanese, who are more frank about bodily processes, and even has a best-selling children's book named The Gas We Pass. Yes, Gamera is powered by farts." That's just amazing. Now, there's an even bigger elephant in the room, his comparison to Godzilla. Some consider Gamera to be a cheap imitation or ripoff of Godzilla. I mean, to a certain extent, I completely understand, but come on, this is the movie business. Like any media, when something becomes popular, people really try to copy it as much as possible. Criticism of imitation or ripping off the original be damned. Think about it like this. I tend to think of Godzilla and Gamera like DC Comics and Marvel Comics. They are constantly aping each other. Giant monsters have been around for a bit too. King Kong and Mighty Joe Young are both big apes, but they were very different movies in execution. Godzilla has imitations from day one from all over the world. Gamera was probably one of the latest imitations of that Showa era, but it definitely was the longest lasting. So I doubt a ripoff can really carry itself that long with a legitimate legacy behind it. And there are some who actually do enjoy Gamera more than Godzilla. It's cool, man. I mean, you do you and you like what you like. Me? Well, I like both the Big G and the other Big G. So the movie opens with a Japanese expedition in the Arctic spotting an unidentified set of fighter jets. And when the American Air Force is scrambled to investigate, a brief firefight ends with a plane being shot down and one of the nuclear missiles it was carrying exploding. This breaks some thick ice that frees Gamera, the giant monster. Now, some Eskimos tell the scientists that Gamera is not to be messed with and that he's essentially the devil's envoy, as they call him. And as you might suspect, Gamera is indeed quite pissed off about being woken up by the nuclear blast. He destroys a Japanese ship and breathes fire all over the place. So as Gamera continues its trek through Japan toward Tokyo, we meet young Toshio, who loves turtles. Gamera wrecks the town, but when Toshio goes to get a better view from a lighthouse, he nearly falls. Gamera, being a kind giant turtle monster, saves Toshio, revealing that his intentions may not be all that bad. That said, Gamera still tramples a lot of stuff and blows up power plants and what have you. The military, working with a zoologist named Hidaka, decide to try freezing Gamera, then blowing him up. This indeed knocks Gamera on his back, and they figure that when you have a turtle stuck on his back like that, he can't really right himself. That's when Gamera uses his fart-powered jets to surprise everyone and fly away. At this point, a consortium of Japanese, Soviet, and American scientists ready the secretive and final resort, the dreaded Z plan, to rid the world of the threat of Gamera. All that said, they just need time to finish the plans. Eventually, Z plan gets completed, but in order to enact the plan, Gamera is lured to Oshima, where a volcano is erupting on the island. He's lured into the cone of a giant rocket and he's fired off towards Mars. Toshio, Gamera's only advocate, says he wants to grow up to be a scientist so that he can someday go to Mars and visit his large turtle friend. Now, let's get to my 3 things that I like about the original Gamera movie. First, the movie wastes no time getting things going and getting Gamera out and in play. This is so much the case that not a single person seems to react to the existence of a giant 60-meter tall turtle with any suspicion or incredulity. The Japanese ship radios the American Air Force, and the general's like, turtle, 60 feet tall. Sigh, I should probably scramble some jets, It's not just that either. It's explicitly stated that Gamera was frozen by the Atlanteans, which I guess existed in the Arctic Ocean. I mean, I always thought Atlantis was in, the Atlantic. But don't worry about location, because it is just accepted that we don't just have a giant turtle, but Atlantis is a real place and a thing. That's because a TV interview basically has this guy say, as you know, Atlantis was a great civilization and so forth. So I guess if you're going to accept the existence of giant turtles, I mean, Atlantis is, I guess, no big deal. Secondly, I admit that for as spiky as Gamera's shell is and has massive as those bottom jaw fang-like things look, I've always thought of Gamera as a kind of cute little creature guy. In some ways, I kind of feel like he's sad. Toshio states in the movie that he thinks Gamera is just lonely and that's why he's acting up. Kind of like that idea that he is confused and scared, but maybe doesn't understand that it ain't cool to go knocking stuff down and squishing things. Admittedly, I may also be somewhat biased based on his future appearances in the Showa era. that cement that kid-friendly attitude. But I also tend to think of Gamera as a bit of an underdog hero monster. We've yet to talk about him in context, but Godzilla's pal and first rival he ever fought on screen is Anguirus. He is a spiky, four-legged creature that often got his ass handed to him. We'll see in the future, Gamera is kind of like the Rocky Balboa in the sense that he loses his first battles with a rival only to barely win the next fight. For that, I have to think of Gamera as a little less badass like Godzilla and Rodan, but more cutesy like Mothra or Anguirus. Finally, I really like the idea of the creature with a bit of a moral code. He does attack structures and such, and he isn't really too cool with adults, but he's overly protective, or at least helpful to children. It's like he meets punishment selectively, but not entirely unfairly. Sure, attacking towns and potentially causing massive fallout from wrecking power plants and utterly destroying an airport ain't exactly cool, but he did save that kid. It's like the adults are paying for what we do to the ecosystem, but children are still considered and deemed innocents. They don't know they are doing really kind of anything wrong, and likely are not willfully making choices that harm the planet, and so forth. These kaiju movies always use a certain morality about the hubris of man or our effects on the planet and so forth, and this movie kind of plays with both. Until we win by blasting that fucker out to goddamn Mars, that is. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later, and don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, and new installments of Monster Mondays each and every Monday on filmseizure.com. Also, check out new posts on my website, bmovieenema.com, every Friday morning.